You know, this whole concept, I got to tell you how it all began. And Dr. John is here, and his daughter, Grace, works with Wesley House. And for the mayor's ball, Wesley House is the charity recipient. And it happened to be in January. Grace said, Betty, do you think you could do some research on the mayors for the 200th anniversary at Key West? And we'd like pictures if possible. You know, the hardest one I got was Terry Johnson's. Well, then you see, Morgan McPherson said when we printed this one out, he said, that's not the one I sent you. Oh. The one he sent was too fuzzy to print. So all the printing was done by the folks at Wesley House, and a volunteer did all these cutouts. And then once this started, you know, this became quite a project. And this is so good to share it with you this morning. And just coming in and looking at it, I thought maybe it might be helpful to have a little perspective of all of this. Now, and my neighbor Karen, who isn't here at the moment, helped me put these up. And then if you're on this side with the stacks, these are mayors in color, in living color, because they would be more recent mayors. And that starts out with Dennis Wardlow. And I just learned something about Dennis Wardlow, in addition to the Concrete Public, which we're all getting ready to celebrate because of what he did, because they said on April 23rd, which is coming up, he read the secession declaration on top of a pickup truck. And if you saw good morning, Karen, I just said you helped put this all up. Thanks. And of course, on April 23rd, Dennis read this secession, kind of a tongue-in-cheek, and it's really created a whole synergy for the community. And then I was talking with a good friend this last weekend, and he said that Richard Branson, now you remember Richard Branson's very famous, and it turned out in about 1992, and at that time Dennis Wardlow was the mayor, and the Richard Branson came here to Key West, talked with him of bringing like a historic DC-3 daily from Orlando to Key West, and it would have music from the 1940s on it. And you see, Richard Branson's mother, her name, she worked as a Star Girl flight attendant, and her name was Eve. And this had been Richard Branson's mother. So she influenced how they dressed for the flight attendants. They reproduced Life magazines from the 1940s that would be in the back of the seat. And then they served their drinks in glass because they didn't have plastic at that time. And so they did this daily. So they came out of Orlando, and they had talked to the mayor to get this all worked out. And they would land on the part of the airport that's for private aircraft, so you didn't have to go through any security. So it was a pleasant flight from Orlando. You get here, and they had a whole plan for the whole day. And then they ended up at Mallory Square, and then back for their flight to Orlando. So it was a historic DC-3 flight, and they continued those until the cost of fuel got a little bit more, because the DC-3 loves to drink fuel. It's a good tail dragger and does a lot. And so if you get a chance, that was unique, and that was developed under Dennis Wardlow. So on this side, and you know, Sheila Mullins, I'll tell a little bit about her later, but it was so hard finding her photograph because you go through files and files and files. Some days I'd spend all day and only find one photograph. So, and that's what they wanted, was to have that type of information. And it was very visual because these mayors were all the way around the room at the Marriott beachside. So we then consolidated them into this area. And how we found some of these pictures, I'll talk about Dennis Wardlow. You see, we cut him out from this whole picture. And you'll see that little edge of the stamp and on the other side is Wilhelmina Harvey. And the reason I shared that is people get a little confused. I got confused too, because one day I printed out a picture of Saunders, and then I discovered he wasn't a Key West mayor, he was a Monroe County mayor. And Wilhelmina Harvey was a Monroe County mayor. So Monroe County has a mayor, all of these communities have a mayor. And then I'll pass this to Nancy. This is how, you see how we got Louis Eisner? He's over here, and this is how we got his picture. Here he's greeting Harry Truman, so we cut out Harry Truman. Now, then we have a mayor who was mayor during the Depression, and he is down here with a hat on. Here's another picture, which we didn't print out, but one of his efforts that he was doing during the Depression was to try to help clean up the community to make it presentable for tourists. Now, this one is William Malone, and he was mayor from 1933 to 1935. So he was there in a really crucial time. These I'm just sharing because of some of the unique photographs. And then Kermit Lewin, you see over there in 1963. I'll just send these pictures around because he's holding a Conch Republic flag. And you see how we cut him off. So this is just showing how we started with this picture and how we blew up some of them. Dr. John, will you tell us about the picture you've got in front of you? And when I took it to Grace, she said, "That's my dad."
So this is a picture, I believe in the years about 1955. My father, as many of you know, had a grocery store on the corner of Caroline and Elizabeth that was started by my grandfather in an old wooden building that probably dates from the late 1800s. Two-story building made of wonderful Dade County pine, all that sort of business. But the downstairs was the grocery store that my grandfather ran, and then my father took it over. Well, as the 50s were modernizing everything, supermarkets came into being, and they had these checkouts that had conveyor belts. The way the store was before my father modernized it was there would be a counter, and behind the counter there were shelves with a stock of everything. And you would come up to the counter and say what you want. I would like one of those, so you'd have a long pole with a grabber and bring it, put it there. And so people would tell you what they wanted, and when they were finished, you added it all up by hand. Not very efficient. In the early 50s, the shrimp were discovered in these waters around Key West, and it basically changed the economy of Key West and the economy of my father's store because many of the shrimpers got their provisions there. So that's why in the about 1954, he knocked down the old building, which probably would not be allowed today, and built a new modern square, tasteless, I shouldn't say that, modern square concrete box. C.B. Harvey then is here at the ribbon cutting. He, in his professional life, was an architect, so he's the architect who designed that building. And just so we make the association, she mentioned Wilhelmina. Wilhelmina was C.B. Harvey's wife, of course. The other people in the picture, we've been able, my family and I, to recognize all of them except one. But basically, it's me when I was about 11 years old. A friend of mine across the street and his sister, my aunts and uncles and my mother and so forth. So it's a really special picture for us, and it certainly ties into a part of what Betty's talking about.
Thank you.
Carlos, thank you.
Then, as we were looking for them, there was a man named Tom Sawyer who was mayor for real. And trying to find his picture, it happened. There was a color photo in the Key West Citizen in a file clipping area. And that's the only photograph that we could find on Tom Sawyer. He was a banker. So we'll pass Tom around for you to see. And then trying to find a good picture of John Carbonell and going into, this is, you see, I spent a lot of time in the Florida room. Brianna is just wonderful. There she is. It's so, yes, Bill.
Just a quick question. How long did they give you to get this ready for the mayor's ball? How much lead time did you have? A year? 3 years?
Brianna just said not long.
Not long. It was really only a couple months. She was in there.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, but some days I'd spend all day with Brianna.
She's hired.
So then on Carbonell, I couldn't find anything other than in the newspaper, and he and his family were the co-owners of the Strand movie theater. So that was how, and then when he was mayor, and then I finally found a picture of him greeting Harry Truman. So that tells you the era, around 1950. Then we had a lot of doctors as mayors. We had one dentist as a mayor. We had a police chief as a mayor. In fact, I think he'd been a police chief in New York before he came to Key West. And this happens to be Louis Eisner, and he and his wife were getting interviewed for the census of 1950. And this is just, photos, so you can see where some of these people appear. So then, talk about C.B. Harvey. There's a lot of neat things happening. Here's C.B. Harvey. We didn't reproduce this picture. He's signing the papers, leasing the land at Simonton and Front Street for use for the Cuban ferry in 1954. Cuban ferry. And, of course, Sandy and several people said, well, how about Sonny McCoy? And here he is, Mayor Sonny McCoy as Santa Claus, and he's sort of water skiing from Cuba. So we didn't redo that one, but Willard Albury was a long-serving person in the community. He had originally been in charge of a cigar factory, and then he ended up as superintendent of schools for all of Monroe County, because that used to be like a political position. So there's a lot of pictures, and it's hard to get one of Willard. He's just back there in the corner. So there's a few of them that we looked at as we were trying to get our cutout for him. But then, of course, we had Dr. Fogerty, and that was at the time that Flagler came to open the railway. This particular one, I think we found over at Key West Art and Historical Society. So there are lots of places, but that's just showing you, where some of these photos came from. Now, as we look over the 200 years in Key West, the census of 1830 revealed Key West population was 517 people. So they had like a committee that kind of ran the town, and they had laid it out into 258 acres and 64 blocks. And the early settlers were primarily from the New England states, and then later from the Bahamas. And as the community grew as a maritime, the military, and for a while it was a county seat community. Then by 1850, you get over 2,000 people, and by 1890, there were 18,000 residents. So basically, in 1828, Key West was designated a port of entry. And Simonton then at that point, there had been lots of figures of like who really owned this land and all, and there was a little bit of scandals, of course. But Simonton was recognized as the owner. Now the first official, now you see some of these people we couldn't find photographs for, and that's why we have some quotes about them up here. But Oliver OHara actually was really officially a mayor, and he was a commission agent from Charleston, South Carolina, and an early merchant. He owned large warehouses and one of the major wharfs. He was consul for several different foreign countries, so you had an international presence here at Key West. And then he was a member of the Key West Union Volunteer Corps during the Civil War. But he was the first man to hold the title of mayor under this charter. And then Fielding A. Brown, his family did a lot of writing about Key West, and he was one of the first permanent settlers, and he came from Virginia. And he too was a merchant. And then Adam Gordon, he settled in Pensacola after Florida became a state, and he was one of the founders of the Tallahassee newspaper. And then he also served, another one, as judge, school superintendent, and a town council. Now, a number of these mayors were people who lived in Key West for a while, and then they left Key West, just as we see today, people leaving Key West. So Adam Gordon, he left Key West before the Civil War. And William Whitehead, I think we got him right over here with his fuzzy hair. He came to work with his brother, who owned 1/4 of the island. And he was collector of customs for years and served on the town council. And then he resigned his office in a dispute, you appreciate this, with city merchants overpaying taxes. And then he returned to his native New Jersey, and he was also editor of the Key West Enquirer. And then the next mayor, of course, would fit into this. He was Tommaso Sacchetti. He was the candidate of a group of merchants who opposed occupational licenses from Mr. Whitehead that he was trying to pass. And Sacchetti, I can almost say it, from Mallorca, spoke little English and ran a sailor grog shop. So he got elected without opposition. Then we had Philip Fontaine. He was a grocer and a ship chandler. And then Alexander Patterson really served for quite a period of time. And I'm still trying to track him down because he came here from Stonington, Connecticut. But all those historical societies are closed for the winter up in Stonington, so I can't really find out that much about him right now. But that he was a veteran of the War of 1812. And then, as a sideline, he was an auctioneer, so that when they went out the ships to the reefs and brought them back, then he would be the auctioneer for the goods. And then he was a Union volunteer in the Civil War and was in charge of the naval station. And a lot of these people were Masons during the 1800s. And when, Tom was not, he was on a leave right then with his health when I was starting to work on this. And I didn't really get to talk to him until his 84th birthday, when he's in having birthday cake. And he told me all these years he had worked on this, and he said, I'd really like to tap that resource, the Masons, because so many of these mayors have been Masons. So I don't know, that would be a great way to find some of their portraits, but we haven't had that door open. And then we had another Sawyer who was a mayor. He also came from Connecticut. So there was a lot of moving back and forth between Connecticut and Key West. And if you get into Stonington, Connecticut, Mystic, Connecticut, you will recognize the homes look very much like a great part of Key West. Then we had Walter Maloney, and he was a lawyer, and he was a supporter of the Union during the Civil War, and he organized the Union Volunteer Corps. Now, I learned this from Chris Moore. You see, I didn't have much about Fernando J Moreno, but he was born in Pensacola in 1822, came to Key West shortly after his sister Angela married Stephen Mallory, who happened to be the son of Ellen Mallory. And Fernando worked with the Wall Company and was with that firm until the 1880s when he returned to Pensacola. For many years, he also represented Simonton's interest. You see all the familiar names that you're seeing of streets? He was an underwriter agent for Lloyd's of London and other insurance company. And then he was a thorough American, though of foreign descent, courtly, polite, distinguished manners. He was to be seen each afternoon taking his constitutional on a pacing pony out to the brush in South Beach. He was slightly deaf, and he carried a silver ear trumpet gracefully suspended from his left arm, which strangers often thought it was a cornet. And somebody asked him, he said, "Old man, when are you going to give your concert?" Needless to say, he couldn't hear the question, for no man was more familiar with him like that. His chief assistant at the time was William McClintock, who was afterwards a mayor. But one of the big things is when that ship with the people to be auctioned as slaves, just had sunk off the coast right here, and the African American came aboard the community. There were a lot of these very young children, actually, that were going to be sold into slavery. Well, it was Fernando Moreno who took his money. He spent thousands of dollars of his own money and built a protection and a little housing for them, and he had to have security people guarding that, because otherwise the people would take a possible slave home with them, because a lot of the people in the community owned slaves. And then he worked with their medical care, and he worked to provide the necessary needs for them. And the government never reimbursed him for any of this, and it was thousands of dollars he spent. So somebody asked me one day about a mayor I really admired, and I thought, well, this is truly one man to admire. And it was Chris who introduced me to him, and we found that a lot of writing has been done on him. And when I was doing this research, I didn't have that door open, and I'm so happy to share that at the time. The Porter family was deeply involved, and John Porter was mayor next. Then we had John Baldwin, who was a former sea captain. And then in 1861, all the Florida officials were removed from office because of the Civil War, and there was a big discussion, of what, and of course what happened in Key West is because this had been a Union outpost. The Union then was able to persevere, even though this was an area that had strong Confederate sympathizers. Then we had Dr. Whitehurst, who used to be the doctor out at Fort Jefferson. And he had to take Dr. Mudd to help him out so that they could cut down the number of people dying of yellow fever. And it was Mudd said, you need to open up and not cover the windows. You need air for these people. So that brought down the number of deaths from yellow fever. So then Dr. Whitehurst, that was his first election after the new Florida Constitution became effective. I hope I'm not laying too much info on you. Okay? All righty. Then we had E.O. Gwynn. You might see him around. He was a native of the Bahamas and was one of the early cigar manufacturers, and later a cigar auctioneer. And as mayor, he signed the first telegraph to the mayor of Havana in 1867. Then we continue, again, another merchant, which is William Allen. Then Henry Mullerton, a native of Scotland. And then we have a person named William Cash. Now, a lot of these people only served a year at a time because that was the length of term. So that's why, and then later you find them serving additional terms. So getting the number, I'm going to have to sit down someday and just count it out. And then I'll let you know when I come up with that. And then, now, Carlos Manuel de Cespedes. I'm not a good pronouncer of his last name, but he appears to be the first Cuban mayor. And his brother or family member had the same last name, who was also a leader in the revolution in Cuba. So again, he was part of the early Cubans who came to Key West, and he was active in the revolution back in Cuba, president of the Revolutionary Club at Key West, and he did give a speech in English at the dedication of the City Hall. And then he returned to Cuba after the Spanish-American War. And then the next mayor was Livingston Bethel, and he came to town when he was 2 years old from Nassau. And he was a lawyer and a judge, and he served as a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, and he was senior warden of the Holy Innocents Episcopal Church. Now that's another one to research. Then we get to another Perry, who was a representative, and then McClintock was the assistant manager to Wall Company, and then he took a job. A lot of these folks were working in the custom houses during these times. And then Monsalvatage later was the president of the Union Bank. And his family is here, and they've been searching for a photograph of him or some kind of recognition. And he then, later then, took another job at the customs house. So all of this was so related. Then we had James G. Jones. Boy, was he unlucky. You know, there was a lot of stirring among the cigar factory. And then it just seems that the only fire engine that we had was back up north getting repaired at the time of fire ignited in a coffee shop next to the San Carlos Institute at 2 a.m. on April 1st. That was in 1885, 86, and it raged for 12 hours. And then it appeared it kind of started other little spots all around. I won't go into that. That's a whole time for another discussion. There were strong winds, of course, but the firefighters were only able to use hand pumpers. So then I'll go to Dr. Maloney. I'm going to jump over a couple of these folks. He actually opened private practice in Key West and opened the Eloise Maloney Hospital. In fact, the previous mayor was Walter C. Maloney, and that was the first private hospital on the island. And then we had George Bartlam, who was the son of Florida's famous shipbuilder. So you see the variety of experiences that folks had who served our community. Benjamin Trevor was born in the county of Devon in England and came to America and Key West and worked as a cashier for the Cortez Cigar Company. And then George Babcock was the son of an Army colonel who helped to build the lighthouses on the reef. And he owned a large grocery and served as a second lieutenant of the Island City Guards. Then I mentioned previously Dr. Joseph Fogerty, who studied medicine in New York and returned to Key West for his practice, married a granddaughter of William Curry, and was mayor when the railroad was open. After he left office, he moved to St. Augustine to be the chief surgeon for the Florida East Coast Railroad. And then in 1826, he was elected mayor of St. Augustine. And what was also unique about Dr. Fogerty, he was the private personal physician to John D. Rockefeller Sr. And he was one of the most prominent physicians and surgeons in Florida at that time. So when Mr. Rockefeller was staying in his winter home at Ormond Beach, Dr. Fogerty would be his physician. So he was then mayor of St. Augustine, twice mayor of Key West, and also a former member of the Florida State Senate. Then Norbert Thompson, the Thompson family, he was the grandson of a Norwegian seaman that was shipwrecked on a Florida reef. In fact, Tom said, now watch all these that say this person came and been shipwrecked. He said, that's kind of stretching it a little bit, but this appeared it might be possible. So Norbert Thompson started as a sponge dealer and expanded his Thompson Enterprises to include a fish house, turtle cannery. Can you picture where this is all along the dock? And then he had a cigar box factory, an ice company, and then his firm discovered the shrimp beds off of Key West. So he owned extensive real estate in Monroe County, and also then after being mayor, he was 12 years as a county commissioner. Then we had Allen B. Clear, and his picture's down here at the bottom, because he saw the first airmail letter and handled that to arrive in Key West. And then there was Louis Otto, who was a pharmacist, and he was a member of the Odd Fellows and the Red Men. So I don't know this particular private group, but he was a police justice and also postmaster. Then later he moved to St. Petersburg. Then Frank Ladd was a refrigeration engineer who came to work for the ice company and organized that. Then we had Louis Eisner, who was born in New York and educated in Brooklyn and served in the New York City Police Department. And then he's the one that moved to Key West in 1944 and appointed police chief of Key West. So he served on the commission and the Florida Keys Aqueduct Board. Then I shared with John Carbonell, because his family was a co-owner of the Strand and the Monroe Theaters. And then you got a chance to see like a picture of C.B. Harvey, who was really a great part of the community for a long time. And then Delio Cobo. And Delio Cobo's right here with his hand up there on C.B. Harvey's shoulder. we were trying to arrange him, weren't we, Karen? We were trying to see, you know, almost we had him touching his cheek. So he was a dentist. So he's the only dentist that's been a mayor. Then it said Kermit Lewin. I just passed some photos around. But he seemed to have a lot of charisma, and he was an announcer for WKWF, opened an office supply store, and one of his favorite and fun jobs was helping his friend John Spotswood begin WKWF radio. Kermit was Key West's first DJ. And then Sonny McCoy, he was actually also born in Key West, had a degree in architecture, and there is a book here in the library that he did like a coffee table book of a lot of the different buildings. But he applied for and received millions of dollars in federal grants. And the money paid for a major overhaul of the city's sewer system, mortgage loans for low-income housing, and repairs to the city swimming pool. And then federal dollars also funded a new tourist attraction, Bahama Village, along Petronia Street. So he served as 10 years as mayor, and at that point had held the office longer than any of his predecessors. And then, as I shared with you a little bit about it, Dennis Wardlow, and his brother is currently still on the city commission, and the family, you know, continues to be very active. And that was a picture where he was holding the postage stamp along with the postmaster and Wilhelmina Harvey. Richard Hyman up here at the top, a friend of mine. I worked in Springfield City Schools for a number of years, and one of my colleagues said, you know, one of my former teachers became mayor of Key West. So Richard Hyman was born in 1935 in Grand Rapids, Ohio, and he graduated from Ohio State, an Eagle Scout. He taught English in Springfield City Schools in Ohio. Then he moved to Key West in 1973 and opened the Gingerbread Square Art Gallery. And he was the first openly gay man to hold the office of mayor in Key West. And he died at the age of 59 of pneumonia that was brought on by AIDS. So that was a story of Richard Hyman. And I sent that picture to his former student because he said he was just a great English teacher that he had. And then people kid, they said, you mean Tom Sawyer was actually mayor? What is fascinating is he and Captain Tony Terracino would be, Tony tried 6 times to get to be elected mayor, and Tom Sawyer would beat him, or other people would beat him. But this Captain Tony was quite a legend, and I think you could just tell books and stories. He was such a storyteller, and they said he had been a charter boat captain, and of course owner of Captain Tony's, and after becoming a gambler, getting involved with the New Jersey Mafia, and being beaten and left for dead at the Newark City dump. This is what he said. He moved to Key West in 1948. As I said, he tried for the mayor's office 6 times. Jimmy Buffett managed one of his unsuccessful campaigns. Jimmy Buffett wrote The Last Mango in Paris about Captain Tony. So listen to that, because he's telling the story of Captain Tony. And he served 1 term, and he had won now on his 6th try for office. He defeated Tom Sawyer by 32 votes out of more than 6,000 cast. And he sought to limit Key West's growth and to keep his reputation as a refuge for eccentrics and renegades who had found their way to the southernmost point of the continental United States. As mayor, he preserved Key West's daily sunset celebration, but he lost his bid for re-election to Dennis Wardlow. That's the prime minister of our tongue-in-cheek republic. Terracino spoke of his 2-year term in office as the greatest 2 years in my life. And you can see that picture of him. You can just picture him thoroughly enjoying being the mayor, and most of all, probably telling all these stories. Now, I was trying to search a lot for Sheila Mullins, and if Rob O'Neill was able to find back in his file of negatives when he was shooting film this nice portrait of Sheila Mullins, and that's how we were able to get it. And Sheila was born in England to an American father and English mother, and she came to Key West in 1971 and elected mayor in 1977 1997, the first woman to hold the office. And I found in a Miami newspaper that she says cruise ship passengers only benefit certain businesses. She said if we have all our eggs in the cruise ship basket, we'll end up like St. Thomas, where when people get off a cruise ship, all they see is other cruise ship passengers. And this is what she told the Miami Herald.
She was a clairvoyant.
So then Jimmy Weekly, now, you see, we couldn't find a picture of him when he was mayor. Of course, he's still on the city commission. And so I went down to Fosta's, and of course his family has been part of Fosta's Food Palace. He's the fourth generation conch. And I said, Jimmy, we don't have a picture of you. So his family took this photo. And then when I took it to Grace Stepperly, she said he's got gray hair. Because when he was mayor, he didn't have any gray hair. So so that's Jimmy with his gray hair. That's what he looks like now. It's not really what he looked like when he was mayor. And his family was coming in to visit this weekend, so he was bringing them all over to see him here at the library. So that was one of their things that they were going to do. And then Morgan McPherson, that's what I said. He didn't like the picture we ended up printing, but it was the one that was sharpest. So he now is a realtor, and he used to be involved in a lot with nonprofits and was the deputy director of the Boys and Girls Club. And he too had graduated from Key West High School and always lived here his whole life. Now Craig Cates now is one of the city commissioners. Actually, he represents more the area of Stock Island. So, and of course, Craig Cates used to own a Napa Auto Parts store and was a world champion boat racer. And he has an office down in the old courthouse. And he has the open door policy. So you can go down and you can chat with him. And of course, some of his projects, he was 5 terms as mayor, and that includes Glen Archer City Hall, the amphitheater at Coffee Butler, and Truman Waterfront Park. So all of that was done during the time of his being mayor. And he was going to come and see his, I call them stiffs, cut out. And then, as I said, Terry Johnson, this is a new photograph of her, because before she was wearing a lot of white suits, but now this is her re-election photo she's got. She's going to be announcing her re-election campaign. And she's been a resident of Key West for 22 years. Well, you see, we've had people representing a wide variety of backgrounds who've served this community. And you are a part of a very fascinating legacy as we celebrate the 200th anniversary.